Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Hi, Faith.
Hey, Dad.
How
I'm
are
Faith
you?
Suggs, and that is Schaefer Suggs, my father, the
You notice
superstar.
I have my full name spelled? Is that something you probably did, though, right?
No, you did that. I'm proud of you.
Wow.
Congratulations. You are so
I'm
me.
getting better at that. How's the weather over there?
It's a little rainy today. How
Yeah,
about you, Chicago?
yeah, it's nice. Actually, it's going to be up to 60, 65. We have one of those late springs, I mean,
Uh,
so yeah, it's going to be a nice day. I'm really looking forward to possibly getting out and get Devin out on the track. Hi, Tracy.
hey, Tracy. Thanks for tuning in. Well, yeah, great. Wait, you said you're going to get Devin on the track. Oh, poor child.
Well, he's complaining about the track running on the track, so we're going to run a cross field, so it's soft. But
Even
he
worse.
did he did a workout yesterday that was unbelievable. I mean, he was dying. I wish I could have done it with him, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no, all good.
No, great. I'm happy. Today's our 11th episode.
I cannot believe it. It goes fast, right?
Yeah, did you know it was Wednesday?
Is it
Days are
Wednesday?
all merging together, yeah. Wednesday, it's hump day at 9:03 a.m. We're live and we're super happy to be here. Today's gonna be super fun. I'm excited. Are you excited?
Oh, I'm excited. We're going to dive into a really topic we probably don't have enough time to talk about.
Yeah, for
This new
sure.
NCAA rule and regarding athletes now having an opportunity to generate income based on their likeness. But I think it's something that we will deep dive into. We have a very, very special guest that we'll bring on. He's backstage. That's not him.
Right, that's not him. But before we bring him on, let's cover the rules real quick, the
Yeah, yeah,
changes.
yeah. Go ahead.
I have some of the statistics right here for those of you. I'll give you some time to read to those who read. Let's move this out you guys' way. So you can see those are some of the bullet pointed changes that have happened. Of course, none of those things were going on when I was in school. So
Me either.
jealous. Of course, you can see we can make money off of our modeling apparel, different logos. Oh, that doesn't include logos. Advertisements, which is big, especially in men's basketball, men's football. Uh, of course, there's little guidelines to it, but this is such a new opening door to a new NCAA. So, how about you give us a background of our guest who's going to help us navigate this fun little topic today?
Right. So our guest is Craig Sawall. Craig and I go back about 35 years, as you well see. He is a huge Irish fan. Um, this is a beautiful family. But Craig, when I first transitioned back to Chicago, he was one of the first people that I connected with. And this is probably 86, 87, and we just connected. I think one of our first conversations was he loved the Temptations. He loved the Temptations. Then the next topic was about Notre Dame. So Craig actually graduated from Notre Dame University, and all of his kids have graduated from Notre Dame University. And I know he was really hoping that you would go to Notre Dame and Devin would go to Notre Dame. And of course, but in his experience, he has a lot of background experience. Not only is he an attorney, lawyer, but he actually worked in the media information department at Notre Dame and got a chance to interview great coaches like Eric Garcia. I know he spent some time with Lou Holtz, but just a great source that has a good grasp on sports. And of course, he is a family friend also. He has been to a lot of your games. He's been to a lot of Devin's games, and he's just a dear friend. And I wanted to invite him on the show to kind of give us third voice to his visibility of what this new rule is going to be, because there's a lot of things that need to be tweaked, but in fact, it is an opportunity for players to make revenue, and it's going to open the door to a lot of questions the advantages that bigger schools are going to have over smaller schools. The bigger conferences are going to have over the smaller conferences. So there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but the reality is the rule is been passed. Start out in California. Good morning, Aaron.
Morning, Aaron.
But without further ado, I'll bring on our guest, Craig Cheval.
Morning, Craig.
Craig.
Morning, guys. It's great to be with you, Schaefer and Faith. I've really enjoyed the show so far, so really excited to be able to join you this morning. Thanks.
So just so you know, why don't you back up a little bit, Craig? So he has a Duke sweatshirt on, which just tells you his loyalty.
You got literally back up, right?
Yeah, you got. There you go. There you go. So that's
well. Not only do I have this, but I bought it on a trip to see Faith play Notre Dame, and I actually wore this to the Faith to watch Faith and Duke play against Notre Dame, and I got a lot of grief from it from the Notre Dame people that saw me and did a double take and said, "What are you doing here? What are you doing wearing a Duke sweatshirt?" And I said, every once in a while, friendship trumps your diploma, and that was definitely one of those times where friendship trumped the diploma.
Oh, that's
no, we appreciate it. We needed all the fans we could those games.
Yeah, because obviously there's a paradigm shift in Notre Dame's basketball with the retirement of Buffett, but at that time they were tough. They were tough, and you actually rooted for Faith. I think, but you were actually.
No. I did, but I cheered for Duke. Outwardly cheered for Duke. Sitting right next to you that game, the entire game. Not just wore the sweatshirt, but cheered for Duke because that's, because of our relationship. I believe it or not, I wanted Duke to win that game. Obviously, it was all about Faith, but I wanted Duke to win that game.
It's fitting really good on you too. I want you to know. I want to add.
All right, well, let's dive into this fun topic.
This is gonna be fun.
Yeah. So I guess the question is to the both of you. Craig, you go first. Have athletes been cheated? Are we coming to that point now where we're starting to realize it, that the public can now say it?
Cheating is an interesting word, Faith, and I would say that certainly that the NCAA has not done a good job of, and their institutions, because of course we all know the NCAA is made up of its member institutions. It's not like some random governmental thing.
Right.
But I think it's fair to say, and it's unavoidable to conclude at this point in time that the NCAA and its institutions have not taken care of their student athletes. And one of the questions that you guys kind of raised with me, previously to prepare for today was, what has forced the NCAA's hand to go along with this? And I think it's pretty clear in a certain sense, two things. We've seen the legislative approach. You've seen what's happened in California and some other states. We've also seen some successful litigation. And even though that occurs in the context of the court and the rulings are made by judges, as a litigator for much of my career, I think that those things, those rulings, the judges have a lot of discretion, in finding things like what's reasonable and what's fair. And I think that's absolutely often shaped by public sentiment. And I think that both the litigation that's been successful, the legislation that we've seen have both reflected a real sea change in public sentiment. And I think that the driver of that is not only that college athletics are generating billions of dollars annually, but where is that money going other than student athletes? Facilities, coaches' salaries and perks, other administrative salaries and expenses. It's one thing to pay Nick Saban $8.8 million a year. He's won 6 national championships as the head coach, whether you like that or not. But quick, can you name Alabama's athletic director, and you know how much he's getting paid every year?
Oh, please tell
me. For those of you that didn't buzz in quickly enough, Greg Byrne is their athletic director. He's getting paid $1 million a year. With all due respect to the late Jerry Krause, who was the Bulls general manager and famously said that organizations win championships, not players. I'm going to tell you something. Nobody's buying tickets or jerseys or turning on their television sets because Greg Byrne is the Alabama AD. And of course, guys like Saban and Dabo Swinney at Clemson, who's a great guy by all accounts, dear friend of mine, worked with him. He's making $9.3 million. Those guys who are winning national championships, they're also raising the boat for everybody else, right? You got a guy like Jim Harbaugh in Michigan. He's been there 5 years. They haven't even played in the Big Ten championship game, let alone win a championship there. They haven't even made the field for the college football playoff in any of those 5 years, and he's making $7.5 million. So I think people look at that, and they look at the student athletes getting nothing beyond tuition, room, and board, and recently a very modest stipend, and they're just outraged. The outrage is coming out in these court decisions, and the outrage is clearly coming out in legislation like we're seeing in California.
Right. And also one thing that we were talking about yesterday when we were going over these notes is the new rule with the NBA and the G League, where you can come straight out of high school to the G League instead of doing the overseas, then come back. Now, that's another thing that may have forced their hand, because now kids would rather go to the G League, which changes the whole structure of that organization. We'll get to that one day. But now kids don't even want the NCAA experience. They have the opportunity to go here or there, and it's like, well, now what do we do? Now we can't kind of because originally it was kids can go overseas, but not a lot of kids want to do that because at times you can often get stuck there. Right. So the NCAA kind of had that as an advantage, but now they have something right here on their own soil. What do they do now? I think that's another thing that could have forced their hand, especially. Yeah. And that was recent.
Yeah, we're not done with this. I mean, as I understand this, we're talking about money that come to the student athletes from third parties, and the NCAA and the institutions would obviously try to oversee it in some respects for a lot of reasons. But at this point, we're not talking about money coming from the institutions in terms of pay or anything else like that. And with that, I've read Teddy Greenstein in the Chicago Tribune for a long time, but he suggested in a recent column that this is going to put an end to talk about paying players. Hey, Teddy, get your money back from Northwestern because you're dead wrong on that one.
Right.
That just ain't going to happen. We're not done talking about this at all.
No, and Dad, let's talk about some of the statistics in this. Okay, so the top 10% is what they're saying, what players can make at this situation. 10% of football and 16% of basketball players could be made around $400,000 to $250,000 a year, respectively. How much? Let's talk about how much tuition is at Duke University. Let me break this down, because I looked at that number and I was like, that's interesting. So Duke tuition in 1984 was $10,000. Okay.
Wow.
In 2019, 2020. Each year was around 60,465, which in 4 years, not counting books, not counting all the extracurricular stuff that they make us pay for, $241,860. Now, what was that number that we just said? 400,000 and 250,000 a year, respectfully. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, but see, what you also articulate is, what did it actually give you as a student athlete?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that, because back in the day they should be grateful for just having a full ride, right? But the landscape has changed. Now with Adidas, Nike, television revenue, all that payoff, that money has not been going to the athletes. It's been going to the schools. So maybe you shared something yesterday that was so insightful. As a student athlete, why do you feel that you need to have extra
money? Well, let's say, so one of the thing is, and I'm glad you brought that argument before I dive into that. The argument has always been for a lot of people that education is priceless. That if you get 4 years of a free ride with no student loans, no debt leaving college, that's perfect, great. I'm so thankful. However, during college, what do you do for those kids who, one, can't even afford to buy their own jerseys in the bookstore? Because sometimes basketball jersey, football jersey can go for $100, $200. The cost of attendance, which goes for our housing technically, so to keep us able to pay our rent for those off campus and for those on campus, to kind of keep it, when we had a lot of schools have suites where they have kitchens and stuff like that to be able to feed themselves. That doesn't always go to the food. So at Duke, we had food points, which is a lot of money, but it was nowhere near the money we got for cost of attendance. Often we would run out of money and we would start paying out of our own pockets. And then clothes, we're student athletes, but we don't wear sweatpants and all that all the time. We have to also be normal kids as well. And then the main one that I always bring up is sending money home to families. A lot of kids who come into these opportunities need the opportunity, because this is a step to the next level, to be able to make money for their families, to be able to get out of where they come from. That money goes home, and it's not a lot of money. So what is these kids left with when that money goes all these different directions, okay? Where they're filling all the things in their pockets that they need to get to. And another thing, which we can come back to that one because I'm not even getting a demographic of why I know that that's a major issue, is female.
Why is it though? I think you should, that is a good one. The social economical dynamics of it. And the kids who actually really need that and depend on that money to actually their families to survive, because the perception is they go to school and the message to them, you come to school and you play football, you play basketball, you go to the next level, right? So like a double standard. So why is it that some kids, from a social economical dynamic, how it impacts them a lot different?
Well, it impacts them because, well, you still have the opportunity to do fast, but you still have the opportunity to do financial aid as student athletes. However, not a lot of kids know about that going into this opportunity. And a lot of kids don't know what the number is that they receive for their cost of attendance before walking into the doors.
Right.
When you commit to a school, that's rarely the question kids bring up. Um, and I think that through the years, we've seen endless universities, endless major basketball, football programs pay players and pay families and provide housing for these athletes and their families, because at the end of the day, they need it. It's not they're now at an advantage. Now they're receiving something like they won the lottery. They didn't win the lottery. Now they're officially on equal playing field in a way. Because a lot of these families have multiple kids in the home, or both parents work. And the reason that their child has worked so hard and gotten to where they are at Duke University, at Notre Dame, at Auburn, Clemson, these high-level programs, is because they need to get to the professional level. They need those $1 million contracts, the endorsements. They need to be able to give back to their family. And that's one of the main things and themes we see in this process for a lot of these student athletes, for sure. Because a lot of demographic is men's and women's in football and basketball is over 50% and maybe 60 to 70% of athletes are normally minorities and people of color. And that doesn't mean they all come from socioeconomic disadvantaged opportunities, but I'm just saying that you can kind of see why this is a common theme amongst these sports, especially, for sure.
Yeah. That's interesting. Okay, what's your perspective on that? So you went to Notre Dame. Give me your visibility of Notre Dame.
Well, it's a Notre Dame's got some interesting challenges there too. I mean, I think we just got done paying, our youngest son's last tuition, and I think it was room, board, and tuition. We're up at about $75,000 a year. And unfortunately, he didn't get the same athletic genes like your kids got, so we were paying full freight for that. And I think that a couple of things come to mind when I listen to Faith, and I know that she was, living day to day with student athletes at Duke, with certainly basketball and football players that had legitimate aspirations to make money professionally. And so I get that. I mean, I know that that's true. I mean, it's not like I'd never heard that before, wasn't aware of that, but just hearing it, from Faith just reinforces that for me, that the tough situation a lot of these kids are in. I think one of the things it speaks to, it's interesting to look at the different major professional sports in the United States, the different models to get there, right? I mean, now, Faith mentioned earlier, the NBA is taking a different approach to the G League and all that kind of stuff, which I think is great. But, they and even more so, the NFL have lived forever with the free minor league system, so it's kind of put these kids in a situation, very, very few kids like Kobe Bryant, was able to go direct, now the rules prohibited and there's talk about a change in back. But even when the rules allowed someone to go straight from high school to the NBA, very, very few kids could do that and do that well. So in other words, the pathway to the NBA absolutely once upon a time had to go through college. And some of those kids, weren't equipped to go to college for a variety of reasons, often because they came from schools that didn't equip them well. And so they had no choice but to do that. This is the only way to get to the NFL. This is the only way to get to the NBA. It's a little bit different in hockey and baseball, and we can have conversations about that, but I understand that reality. I also kind of, you talk about some of those numbers, it's like, we all know, Schaefer, as an NFL veteran, what the odds are to end up from high school star to getting a paycheck in the NFL. And getting a paycheck for a year, what's the average career in the NFL these days? It was somewhere between 3 and 5 years, right?
Yeah, 3.2 years, right?
The NFL. So although I'm extremely sympathetic, Faith, to the kids that are trying to do that need to do that, And God bless the ones that are able to do it. But we all know that the vast majority of those kids aren't going to be able to do that. So a big thing for me in this is our schools, our institutions, and I think Duke's an exception. I'm pretty convinced Notre Dame's an exception, but we've done a horrible job of helping those kids get meaningful degrees that, whether they make it or don't make it, whether they play 3 years or 5 years or 20 years, how many guys like Tom, even if you make it, are you going to be set for life? Not very many people can be set for life after 3 or 5 years. And it's been such a blessing to watch, you and your brother Devin grow up, and watch your parents raise you, and to watch you work so hard at your sport, which you love, but you also worked at, and then use it, to get not just a piece of paper, or not just to get a free ride, and maybe not even get the piece of paper because you weren't that interested or your school didn't support you. But to me, this is a great success story. And I know that not everybody has the opportunity to go to Duke for a lot of different reasons, but our institutions, if you look at that, our institutions aren't doing a good enough job of helping young people do that. And I say that not to disagree with anything that you're saying. Again, your first question was, are the kids getting cheated? And my answer to that would be yes. So this is not disagreement, but I also trying to reflect the reality that as much as those kids want and need to support their families, that's not necessarily a great plan. And we've all seen it, even the kids that have the talent and have the work ethic, sometimes an injury takes them out. So God bless them, go for it, do it. And we need to do a better job of helping them as student athletes, but we also got to help more people, capitalize on this opportunity. This is not an argument that take your tuition and room and board and be happy and shut up. I'm not saying that. I am saying, though, that it does have value, and relatively few people seem to take advantage of it the way that you and your brother have done it, thanks to the values that your parents had and instilled in you guys.
No, and I think that's also a great point, because I talked on a couple shows ago about the preparation they give student athletes for the next level, which isn't just professional, but also creating resumes, cover letters, preparing them how to walk into interviews. That type of stuff is often, because student athletes have such a rigorous schedule, but also the resources given to them. A lot of universities can only we're trying to give you academic resources first, let alone career resources. That stuff is normally voluntary. So a lot of kids don't really think that it's important because they're still worried about finals. They're still worried about this type of stuff. So I can see how when they hit, and it happened to me, when you hit around January, February, when people start saying, well, what are you going to do next? And you're just like, well, how do I go next? What do I do? What do you mean a cover letter? What do you mean that I need to make my resume 1 page, 2 pages? How do I, and those type of questions, I can see how a lot of universities don't have that preparation, so that then when these kids leave their doors with a great degree, how do they use it? And what do they do with it?
Yeah. And if you just indulge me for just one more second here on this, because I'm not sure this is actually the heart of it, but, I love your show and I love what you're doing. And I hope that one of the things that happens with your show is that more and more parents, Frank, you knew most of this. I mean, you got help without a doubt, but you had that mindset when you showed up at Duke for the first time. You had that mindset when you were being recruited by Duke and lots of other places. I'll tell you, my view, and you guys may disagree with this, you didn't let the system use you, Faith. You used the system, and good for you. And if one of the things that I hope comes out of this program over the course of however long it goes, I hope it goes a long, long time, that through your voice and your platform, the two of you and Devin will help more families understand that it's like, great, we're going for the NBA, we're going for the NFL, we're going to do everything we can, but also we're showing up there to use the system rather than letting the system use us. And again, none of this is meant to say that kids shouldn't be getting money for this. It's almost they're related, but they're separate issues. You guys have done a great job, and it's just as a friend of your family, it's such a joy to see you guys do that. And if you can get more people to do that through your voices and your platforms, that'd be a great thing.
Good. Thanks. No, for sure. No, it's definitely about making the best of what's in front of you and what's at the table, because at the end of the day, we're all very blessed, those student athletes who get to that level, to be able to play and get full scholarships. It's all a blessing. One, because you're getting a free education, but also because you're amongst people who are also elite peers, elite friends. So it's one of those great things. You kind of have to sit back and remember where you are. But as you go through it, also take note of some of the things like, wow, this should really be something that we speak out and change as well. So I think that's one of the great things. One, being a student athlete is a balance of all different things. But let's dive into, I have a question, maybe for both of you, but let's have Dad, you start. So let's talk men's basketball, let's talk football. Okay. Obviously most lucrative sports in NCAA, easily. Okay. Both very highly competitive, both always on national television. these universities work extremely hard often to get these players into the university. Okay, some rules are bent. A lot of help in making essays. A lot of help is had. A lot of resources to get this talent into their universities. Okay, so if you're putting that much effort in, you can see how a lot of people are a little confused on why it took so long for us to start to be like, here's your image, here's the rights to your image. What's your opinions on that, Dad? You can go ahead.
Well, you talk about using the system. Now we're waking up, and for someone who lived early on in the recruiting process and back in the mid '70s, I remember going to the East-West Shrine game coming from Ball State, and I saw other players from bigger schools driving up in new cars, right? So I knew that there was a disadvantage. So this has been going on for a long, long time, and I think the reality is we, as a sports culture, really needs to be honest, be really honest about what's at stake, because there's billions and billions of dollars being made. From the time I graduated from college in 1976 to now, the landscape has changed drastically. And there's always been a very clandestine messaging around recruiting. You come to my school, and it was we should call it under the table money, right? This has been going on for a long time. I didn't have the advantage because there was no under the table money, right? There was $45 a quarter for laundry money, and I think there was 1 quarter, 2 quarters I didn't see it, right? So this has been going on for a long time, and we're at a point right now. The landscape has changed.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of revenue that is being generated, okay, for these universities, especially the bigger schools, is astronomical. It's astronomical, and we need to think about what's going to be fair. Is it going to be fair? You look at this role. There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, but it's different because when you're being recruited, they're promising you the world, even at the Ball State level. But they're promising you the world, right? And when you get there, they said academics and athletics is really athletics. Okay. Well, academics when we get there. Right. Fortunately, because of my experience growing up, the value system that my parents, gave me, I translated that into the way I raised you guys, because I realized that I only played 3.2 years. I played the highest. The average life expectancy is 3.2 years. Right. And I understood that I had to make the transition. It was really kind of neat. I love Craig like a brother because he was there when I began to make the transition from playing professional football to being redefining my life, right? Mm-hmm. We met in 1987, and he watched that transition. Unfortunately, a lot of guys don't make that transition. They're not prepared for it. You talked about, do these universities prepare you for it? Well, the professional sports don't necessarily prepare you for it. So the messaging, when you're getting recruited, right? And unfortunately, there's not a lot of parents out there that have the knowledge and the experience that I have. That now I'm able to, when we went through our recruiting series, those are the things that I was able to bring to the table. I need to get out of the way, but I was able to bring it to the table because, when you get to a university, it is really different. And these kids are actually you're going to play football. You're going to play professional football, professional basketball. That's the reason you come to our school. That's the message that's being said, but it's not actually verbalized.
Right.
So it's very, very different. So we're at a point, we're at a junction right now where it's happening. We just need to really define how that's going to work, where it's actually, Craig, you can disagree with me or agree with me. Is it going to be fair? Is it going to be fair, for, a guy named Zion Williamson, who goes to Duke, who's going to probably now, it's legal for that car dealership to say, listen, Zion, come to our school and we got endorsements for you. You can come represent my Cadillac dealership for $50,000 an hour, right? You're not going to be able to do that at Ball State, right? That's where we are with this, right?
No, I agree with you completely, Schaefer. And it's kind of funny as you're talking, and think about how the money, it's not like it's just kind of kept up with the rate of inflation. The world's completely upside down, Faith, from what it was like then. You might have read this, but I remember this. When I was in college, and I graduated in 1981, so a little bit behind your dad, but in the same basic era, I don't think things were that different in that short period of time. The NBA Finals, at least one of those years, the NBA Finals were on tape delay. They showed them after the late local news, the NBA Finals on CBS. They had the rights at that time. There was no ESPN. There was no cable. That's a snippet into that. I worked at and you might get a kick out of this. I worked at the very first varsity women's varsity basketball game at Notre Dame in the fall of 1977. The first one. The uniforms that they wore, and I can find you a picture of this because I worked on the media guy to help put it together. While I was there. They spent so little money on those uniforms that it didn't even say Notre Dame on the front of their home. It didn't say anything. It just had a number. It was like something you would go down to like Dick's and just buy for your look. In fact, it's not even true anymore. Like the little 8-year-old kids have, major league replica uniforms. I mean, it was an athletic shirt and it had a number on the front and a number on the back. It didn't say Notre Dame. It didn't say Irish. It didn't say Shamrock. That was it. And that's the truth. But it's interesting. I had this conversation once, and Title IX's been great. Obviously, all the things that happened allowed you to experience some of the things that you did. So I'm a proponent of it. But I was in a conversation once, and this actually led to me getting more directly involved in women's basketball there with their coach at the time. She was the very first coach. She coached women's basketball and tennis at that time. We were talking about Title IX, and part of it in those days was kind of a men versus women. And there's some issues there for sure. But I'm going to tell you what, at Notre Dame in those days, it was football, and it was men's basketball, and it was hockey. They actually had a hockey program, which is pretty good. Other than that, it was jack. My roommate was the captain of the baseball team. They had one scholarship to split among that whole team, one. And so Notre Dame having kind of the big name because of football and stuff, their baseball team was terrible. They would go and get their clocks handed to them by Bethel College and by Valparaiso and all that kind of stuff because they had one scholarship to give out. That's the way it was. And so as the money has exploded over the years, I think it took a while for the public to catch up with kind of how much money is, because back in the day, the athletic director, he wasn't getting paid jack, right? I mean, it was just, it was a kind of a nice job, and he wasn't getting rich off of that job, right? Most of the coaches weren't for that. Certainly the coaches outside of football and basketball weren't. All of a sudden now you got all this money, and the general public probably wasn't paying attention to it, and certainly wasn't paying attention to where it was going. And so now, as I said earlier, I think we finally caught up to that fact. It finally became so obvious that the general public was like, wait a minute, this is wrong. But it took a long time for people to understand how much money there really was and where it was going.
Right. No, for sure. And it's funny that you said that because the very definition of sports from my place where I witnessed it, and then I can contrast it with my dad and his times, is such a night and day.
Oh.
College basketball, college sports, everything is about money. And it's how do we bring people in for money? How do we market the programs for more money, for more boosters, for everything? Because at the end of the day, we're running multi-million-dollar programs at these million-dollar universities. NCAA can bring in billions of dollars a year, but universities, a lot of them bring in millions and millions of dollars a year. And as a women's basketball at a high-level university, but at a university with a major men's basketball program, where I see the difference in it. They play Madison Square Garden twice a year. They fill up Cameron every single time. They have Barack Obama in there, Dwayne Wade. They have all these different amazing people come in. There's rappers. That's the one thing we saw with Zion in that last season of the 2018-2019 season is college basketball has completely changed because I have never in my 4 years witnessed something like that. My first 3 years, it was like, okay. But that final year, that year with Zion, with RJ, when it smelled like money. It was insane. Like we had rappers walking, we had Future, we had all these different type of famous rappers. We had Barack Obama, we had Dwayne Wade, if LeBron wanted to be there. And we used to be so jealous. I remember this specifically because we always were out of town when these famous people were coming in. So I was like, what is happening? Everyone wanted to be part of what was going on there. Like they needed security to get the kids in and out of the stadiums. Like we have never seen that before. And it looked so professional because people were falling out. People were obsessed with being part of this movement, this thing. And Duke did such a great job of marketing these players and bringing in all this money. And I have never seen like that. And I really think that, wow, that was an anomaly. I don't think that like the universities will ever get that again because it was the Zion era. I think that there's no going back really.
No,
Like college sports, college basketball, college football, especially, I see them as professional programs.
God, as you were talking, and I don't want to get off topic, but the same thing has happened in the NFL, right? We just finished our collective bargaining agreement. So from the time I actually start playing, right, to today, the difference in the amount of revenue that the NFL has been able to generate in comparison to the amount of money that the players are actually getting is unbelievable. So we're going through that right now. So it doesn't necessarily stop in college sports. I mean, the landscape has changed a lot, So, the amount of money that the actual athlete is actually getting in proportion with the amount of money that's being made is just unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. To me, one of the things, Faith, you're talking about some of the things that were going on at Duke during Zion's, year there. And you said, describing all those really neat things that we were jealous. That reminds me of your question earlier about, in Schaefer, what's fair? That's going to be a huge challenge, whether we're talking about money coming in from third parties or money that's being paid, by the institutions. Either way, I mean, how are we going to define fair? Is it fair that we're going to compensate you, however we're going to do it, based upon the revenue you directly generate, jersey sale, or are we going to pay this, the Heisman candidate the same as we're paying, the 85th scholarship guy on that football team? Are we going to pay, a women's, field hockey player the same as we're going to pay a Duke men's basketball player? Or is fair going to be, we're making basically similar demands on all these student athletes, whether they're playing in front of, 18,000 people or whether they're playing in front of 75 people, they're still putting the same amount of time in. They're still wearing that same Duke jersey or that same Notre Dame jersey. I mean, is it because, and some of the arguments you made earlier, not arguments, but the points you made earlier, they don't have time to get a job during the school year or the summer. And that applies to whether you're, going to be a first round draft pick or whether you're going to medical school next year, as a lacrosse player or as a, whatever. And I think those are other things that who gets to define what's fair, because that kind of goes back to the pay thing too. I'm like, okay, great. Let's just make up a crazy number. Let's just say that the NCAA was going to give every student athlete $50,000 a year, which is crazy. Do you think that some kids and some families aren't going to be like, when the booster comes around saying, hey, I want you to come to my school, so I got some more for you on top of that? We're not.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's a great point. So let's go through where this jealousy can come from. I think the first one we talk about is what Craig just said, is athlete versus athlete.
Right.
And you have women's field hockey is looking at women's basketball a certain way, or women's field hockey is looking at other female sports who are generating a lot. At Duke, at Carolina, they have very great soccer teams, okay? Final Four bound every single year. Obviously, what they get paid or what their endorsements are things those girls get opportunities with is going to be very different to what field hockey sees or gymnastics or those type of programs. Yep. And I think that also you look at within teams. So let's dive that one. I think that it's almost impossible. This is one of my big pushbacks against this pay the athlete rule whenever people bring about is what's the number? How do we calculate this up? How does the NCAA sit around the table and be like, okay, let's play men's basketball this, football this, and what happens when we get people complaining? What do we do then? Do you just say, okay, well, this is what you're generating? Is there a formula that they can kind of pull together?
Right.
I don't think so.
No, it's individualized right now. It's the opportunity that presents itself. Right. Mm-hmm. So the jealousy is going to obviously be there. There's not only from athlete to athlete, but from team to team, from conference to conference. How is that going to impact the recruiting? It's going to impact the recruiting unbelievably. Right. So you're so right.
Yeah. It's none of these things are meant to push back against what we started with, that the student athletes have been cheated. I said it then. I agree with it then. I agree with it now. But I tell you what, I mean, it's going to be crazy. I mean, I know how demanding your 4 years were at Duke, and it was a job in some respects. It felt like a job. The demands were crazy. I mean, once this starts to happen, what's NFL stand for, Schaefer? Not for long.
Not for long, right?
Cutthroat now. It was cutthroat now in your 4 years, and I agree, it was. It ain't no, when you're like, oh, we got to pay this guy. We're going to keep him around or not? Nope. He's not. Bye. See you later. I mean, and again, I'm not saying this is a reason not to do it. I'm just saying, man, we are opening up a huge can of worms, and we should open it up. We need to open it up, but man, it's a can of worms.
Oh, for sure. And another thing is this is all about image. Obviously, on the men's side, it depends. Now, when it comes to endorsements, when it comes to branding, which is a major thing that I'm interested in, when you look at these athletes from, say, I own a company, and mine is a family company, and I want to choose the athlete that's going to go with my company, the kid who looks like they understand how to brand themselves, how to be involved within these endorsements, I will pick the kid who normally goes with the family theme. Now, only certain places can afford to be like, yep, we'll take the best player regardless of what they look like, how they act, or whatever. Only certain companies can do that. But when the discrimination starts to happen, like when that starts to happen, this is something that has came to me. What do we do? Because now that's more problems. A whole can of worms. Now, if I'm on a team and I see this kid always gets endorsements because of who he is, where he comes from, his connections, and I'm like, me and him have the same numbers, but he's getting this opportunities, my opportunities are completely different. Obviously, someone's going to feel slighted, and someone's going to feel offended, and then the NCAA has to deal with that. So, while I like the whole first come first serve, it's all in your plate type of thing, I can see how this could be a problem on that side. And I'm not even going to dive into how it could turn into nasty for the women's side, because it's very much driven of what you look like and who you are, especially in women's basketball.
Right,
sure.
right. But what did you say about Skylar Diggins? I mean,
She changed the game.
She changed the game, exactly.
She changed the game, and we had many beautiful players before that who were like top level players, but it was when the media started to gravitate around them, and Skylar Diggins and Notre Dame became a pretty program, where the girls were all very well put together. Same with Duke, which was who Duke was before with Grant Hill and those type of players. You can kind of see how the themes of the programs were, because you get people to come in and watch the games. You get TV more and more and more, and you can sell your media guides, and you can do all this different type of stuff because that looks like more money for us. So why not play it easy? And I think the one thing that came to my mind is when Tennessee and Rutgers played in the national championship, and Rutgers was considered the nappy-headed hoes, and Tennessee was supposed to be the pretty girls, and it was like media sucked it up because it was like that's what everyone was thinking, but you don't say it. It was that type of thing, and everyone was like, "What? Their talent speaks for itself. What do you mean? It's Vivian Stringer. She's the greatest coach. So what do you?" So that's what comes to my mind when I think of that, when I think of women, because that can get very dangerous on that end for sure. 100%, and not just talent. It's for women for sure. That's what sells.
Well, you probably
remember another layer there, Faith. But that's a whole nother program, the Russell Wilson effect, right? A whole nother level of who actually gets the endorsements, right? What is the image they're actually looking for, right?
Right.
You know, how transcendable are they, right? So that's a whole other layer. That's a whole other topic that's going to probably be a part of this, because
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Craig.
Implicitly, a lot of the things we've talked about today have kind of almost been like based upon free market principles, right? Mm-hmm. The players are helping to generate revenue. The players should share in the revenue. And you know what? I'm with that. I mean, most people are with that. But sometimes the free market's pretty ugly, right? Sometimes the free market allows people to kind of choose how they want to spend their money. And if they want to spend their money, paying for endorsements from the teams or the players that look good, what are we going to do about that? And I'm not saying we shouldn't do anything, but I think that's another place where we see this tension. We see this conflict, and we see these things that we got. We're just going to let the free market, which has kind of been driving a lot of the conversation, a lot of the rationale and the argument from the get-go. Like free market is like, these kids are getting cheated, as you said earlier. I was going to say something else. But now let's, free market. Whoa, all the money's going here, all the money's going there. Do we like that? And now do we want to kind of come in and try to engineer a little bit within the free market? And it'll be interesting to see how that happens. I mean, I'm sure your dad remembers this name, and it may resonate with you. But in the world of women's tennis, Anna Kournikova, right? Mm-hmm. You remember her, Schaefer, right? Really? You don't?
Yeah.
Oh, you just okay. Good. I was gonna say it'd disappoint me if you didn't remember her.
Oh yeah.
Made gazillions of dollars. She never won a major. Never won a major, and she won a handful of tournaments. But she looked great, on the camera, and she had, she clearly was, she was at the level where she was clearly competing at that. But she was, she was far down the pecking order of who's winning the titles, who's winning the Grand Slams. It wasn't her, but she was raking like nobody else was raking.
Right.
Yeah, and then for sure. I think that'll be a major problem. Athlete to athlete, sport to sport, gender wise, for sure is going to be a one of those battles. I have one question to kind of like jump off and then jump back on because I want to dive into a major part of this discussion that I'm really excited for. Craig, how do you think that individual university sports marketing programs, the SIDs, the media, how do you think they'll be affected by this? Because they can't control the image of their athletes anymore.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really you kind of gave me a little heads up on that yesterday, and it really made me think. I worked at Notre Dame for 4 years for Roger Valdesari, a legendary sports information director. A lot of people think he was the best ever. He's the guy that changed the pronunciation of a guy from Joe Theismann to Joe Theismann. So it was Theismann for Heisman, and Joe finished second in 1970 in the Heisman to Jim Plunkett from Stanford. But so it probably worked out better for Roger because Roger's been known for that forever, and Joe finished in second place. But that was Roger. And back in the day, and Schaefer, you'll remember this, the universities could control everything because television in those days, first of all, there's no cable. Secondly, in those days, ABC had the rights, and there was a rule that the NCAA imposed. Any team could only be on their national or regional broadcast from ABC 3 times over 2 seasons. Didn't matter. Notre Dame, USC, Alabama, Texas, Michigan, Ohio State, 3 times in 2 years. So print was king. Newspapers were king, magazines were king, and Roger controlled all that stuff in a certain sense. Roger decided who was going to get interviewed, kind of like what you're going to now a little bit. In the universities, 2 things have been happening, and they're kind of almost opposition to each other. The universities have been looking at trying to take the middleman out. They're not there yet, but they're trying to. It's like, okay, this is our content. And primarily the content is the actual games, but it's also other stuff. It's features and all that kind of interviews with players and all that kind of stuff that they're now putting on video, and it's on their websites and all that kind of stuff. You can see that the conference networks are kind of an interim step to that. I mean, ultimately, but in the context of that, look at Texas. Texas doesn't want to be part of that the Big 12 network. They got the Longhorn network. And of course, Notre Dame's would do that. So in a certain sense, on one hand, universities are trying to become the creator and the distributor, the creator, producer, and distributor of that content. And that makes sense to me, right? Why would we have ESPN involved if we can figure out a way not to have them involved? At the same time, though, and so that's going to be interesting. At the same time, though, the good news from the student-athlete perspective is social media is blown up, right? So anybody with a Twitter account or anything else, they can be their own producer. They can. So Roger, bless his heart, he's going to turn 93 this Saturday, as a matter of fact. He would not be able to control things the way that he was able to control. And again, let me. Wow. Roger was a really great man, and there's hundreds of Notre Dame football players and other athletes that love him. And so it's not, he wasn't doing it for evil or manipulative way. That's just the way it was. He sold Notre Dame, he sold their players. But when somebody from the Chicago Tribune said, "Hey, Raj, who would be a good story idea?" Roger's like the one saying, "Okay, it's this guy or it's that guy or whatever." Mm-hmm. His motives were always great. Don't get me wrong, but that's how much power he had. And in a certain sense, the universities are trying to grab more of that power, but at the same time, we got the social media thing, which is going to continue to empower the kids too. And I think right now, one of the things that you mentioned early, Faith, was these new rules that the student athletes won't be able to use the likeness of the university, the logo, the uniform, the name, whatever. And I think on legal basis right now, they're on really solid ground to do that. The universities or the pro teams, frankly, are in solid legal ground. But if the NCAA doesn't come close to turning the tide on public sentiment here, I wouldn't be surprised if lawsuits kind of challenging that. It's like, hey, you know what? I should be able to wear my Duke jersey in this thing. Right now, they're going to lose those lawsuits. But if the NCAA is perceived as continue to not do right by the kids, I think more and more courts and legislatures are going to take a shot at that too. So it's going to change a lot in both ways, right? Universities are getting more power in a certain sense, consolidating their power, delivering the content directly. But social media is almost like the saving grace against that for the individual student athletes.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't help but have that idea because it was like, at the end of the day, for people who don't know, the SID, Sports Information Director, is like the buffer between the rest of the media. Like they have to go through them to get to the athletes, to the coach, which is good because it gets rid of a lot of fluff. But now these kids have so many more outsources to communicate. People can come to them through social media to interview. Right. There's so many different areas for these kids to do their own branding, their own marketing of themselves, that this should be interesting what happens to positions like that, but also to universities who either let it go with the wind or they're like, they try to continue to control how their athletes are imaged. So glad I get that. But finally, my favorite discussion, I'm so excited for it. Recruiting is going to change. Daddy touched on it a little bit. Now boosters, go ahead. You can take it away. And I'll
Right. So, the illegal solicitation or the illegal under the table money it's open season right now, right? So part of the recruiting process is going to be part of the conversation. It's going to be a part of the conversation. The NCAA is going to have to really look at that because it's going to change the tide. Because here, at Duke, how many years do a great superstar go to Duke? Maybe 1 year, 2 years. The amount of impact that they have on that school and the revenue that they're going to generate is unbelievable. So these kids are all coming from the same dynamics. Most of these kids are coming from social economical dynamics that, they're going there to ultimately make a lot of money, right? But a lot of them don't have a lot of money, right? So when boosters and schools wave that carrot in front of them, right? Here's X amount of dollars that you are going to make if you sign with us, okay? This booster, this opportunity, that is going to change the tide. That's going to not even the playing field. Right now, it's the reality.
Right. And I guess the question is okay, so now these big schools can have all of the talent.
Yes.
Okay. With no ceiling to how much they spend on the talent. What happens to our baby schools who were able to maybe afford one of those players when they were playing under the table or they got the, what happens to our Cinderella programs? Is the underdog done for? Is NCAA tournament changing? Craig, do you want to go into that?
Sure. I did a little looking and I found a comparison from 2018. So pretty current. And this is from the Knight Commission. So, it's not biased or anything else like that. And it looks at the revenue, the overall conference revenue for that same year, 2018, for the SEC versus the Conference USA. And there's a lot of fascinating stuff in this chart. But the one thing, to go to your question here, Faith, donor contributions in the SEC were 27% of the overall athletic revenue, along with, media rights, postseason football, conference distribution, ticket sales, all of the other stuff, the whole pie. 27% of it is donor contributions. That's money that they're paying, and getting a tax deduction. That's not under the table. That's how much money there is, that they're willing to talk about and declare. The Conference USA the same year, donor contributions, instead of the 27% or 12%. And in raw dollars, in Conference USA, that translated into $52 million. In the SEC, that percentage translated into $513 million. So roughly 10 times more money, if that's an approximation of it. That's just a window into it. So what do you think the going rate for players' autographs is going to be in Tuscaloosa versus Muncie? Right? So the haves and the have-nots, but how about even within the same conference, right? How about the going rate for football player autographs in Tuscaloosa versus here in Columbia, Missouri? I guarantee you they're not going to be the same. So the gulf between, Alabama and Mizzou, which are ostensibly both among the haves, if you want to look at it that way, there's already a gulf there, and that gulf's going to grow even greater and greater.
Right. And that's my thing. I mean, the one thing about the small schools, they've always had able to have opportunity. And currently I'm at Long Island University, so obviously we're no Clemson, but it's like you can see that the resources are already skewed. Okay. Mm-hmm. Alumni skewed, little money is given back to a lot of these universities. So what they're playing with, what they're entering the season with is nowhere near before last season, is nowhere near what these big time programs, Power 5 programs have. Okay. So now this rule is unveiled And now the athletes, also with the transfer rule up in the air, now these athletes are like, why do I want to be Michael Jordan of this school when I can go to the Power Five, make all this money, be on TV, I own my image now, and I have a better opportunity to go professional? Now that gap, like you said, is even larger. The NCAA tournament is going to be flooded with Power Five teams. It's not going to be 2 or 3, 4 or 5 of the Power Five. I'm thinking that we'll see 8, 7 deep for sure, because a lot of these schools won't have the resources or the ability to be able to go and make a name for themselves unless they have 4-year players who decide to stay for 4 years, which is also very rare. So, Dad, what do you think?
Well, we need probably 3 shows to dive into this. I mean, you're so right. I mean, it's going to change the landscape of college sports without a doubt. I mean, there's so many thoughts going in my mind right now. It's just we have between now and January 1st before that rule is executed, and hopefully we can find that balance. But I don't know if there's enough time to do that. It's going to be along the way.
Yeah, no, probably not. We may see the end of our Cinderella runs. But Craig, thank you for joining us today on F3. We're so happy to have you. You did a great job.
Well, thanks. It's been a delight to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. We are excited to hear everyone's thoughts on the new change in the collegiate athletics. Please comment, share this video. We want to hear your ideas so we can come back around to this eventually. We are back on Friday with an amazing show. I won't be here. I know you will miss me, but my co-host will reunite with his 3 former New York Jet teammates who play with him in the defensive backfield. They will continue our decision on how COVID-19 is impacting our world, and you'll hear from the professional level of some funny guys. And they will also share how playing in the NFL has impacted them physically and mentally, along with how it's affected their families as well. So once again, this is Faith Family Focus, and our mission is to use our faith as a vehicle to help guide and show everyone to strengthen the family core. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you Friday.